Run out of time. Okay. Welcome everyone to the Northern Real Farming Conference 2021. We think this is the last session of the conference, apart from the feedback later on. We've entitled this session Growing Influence. I certainly think the Northern Real Farming Conference has a lot of growing influence, and we're very grateful for the work they're doing because so much dynamic stuff's going on. This session's about the progress of the Urban Agriculture Consortium since we launched last year, some feedback from COP26, policy influencing progress and focus on Sheffield, bits of feedback and discussions, and then a little bit on prognosis and plans for 22. Yeah. So, Maddie, do you want to run through this one? Because I think this is where we started from.
Yes, certainly. So I'm Maddie Longhurst, and I coordinate the Urban Agriculture Consortium with Jeremy. So just in brief, the consortium is, as you can see, a kind of coming together, convening of many different organisations and individuals across the food system of the UK. And our purpose really is to convene collaborations to co-create the conditions for urban and peri-urban agroecology to thrive within the wider living systems of the planet. So that's kind of the way that we work, and this session is about giving our consortium partners and friends a platform to a way of coming together, a way of sharing their knowledge and expertise and building solidarity and relationships to create greater leverage across the changing food system. We sort of look not to dominate one particular area, but to really amplify and accelerate and add value to what is already going on. And in the spirit that we have all the solutions we need, how do we unlock the things we need to make them happen at speed and at scale? Okay, great. Can we have the next slide, please? So when we launched last year, we took a conscious decision to focus on 5 places in the north: Lancaster, Middlesbrough, Leeds, Sheffield and Nottingham. We know Nottingham's not really in the north, but it was bolted on because there's good stuff going on there. And out of those discussions, the actual co-design looked at these key areas: policy influencing, farm starts with an Land Workers Alliance, fringe farming, dynamic food procurement, mapping food hotspots, accessing land with looking at particularly through the Church of England. And as Maddie said, we're looking at building collective power and amplifying and accelerating. So next one, please. And as well as that, during the first year, so this is UAC is a brand new entity, really. We've done quite a lot of other stuff around typology, a guide to urban agriculture, to try and encourage people to look beyond allotments and community gardens, which is what a lot of local authorities will do automatically. We've done some work with the Town and Country Planning Association on the 20-minute neighbourhood and got food in there. Maddie's working with the West of England Combined Authority to try and see if we can get food systems into that framework. And we also did a year 1 evaluation, all of which you can find on our website. So next one. So this is the whiteboard that we're using as a Miro board, and I don't expect you to be able to see everything on there, but the central core of this is the Pathfinder places that we mentioned, our COG or Core Oversight Group run by Green Future Associates, and around that are the key areas that we're working on. So there's farm starts, mapping, city food regions, can't even read it myself, the policy influencing one, and looking at new and emerging projects like the nutrient density with Griffin. So it just gives you an idea of how we're building this project and how it's expanding and various things on satellites on the outer periphery. So just to concentrate on a couple of those, the next slide. So yesterday there was a farm starts session which Maddie and colleagues ran, and this timeline gave an idea of how that's developed since
late 2020 through to now, and how we're going to go forward in the future with various workshops. Now, we're not going to repeat that today, but I've copied it. So the next slide is this. So one of the emerging things that we found as soon as we started these discussions was that people wanted support with policy influencing. And I've always thought this in the pre-consultation work we did, one of the key barriers for growth of agroecology was influencing local authorities and trying to get people to talk to you in the same language, in the same room. So we've conceived of this idea of a double-edged attack. One is called the ping and one is called the wing, and they're deliberately supposed to make you laugh a little bit, so that's fine. And the idea of the ping is that we get in the same space local authority officers or councillors and key people from the local food partnerships, whoever they may be. So we trialled this idea out in April and May in Northern Ireland, where we had three sessions in rapid succession with local authorities and our colleagues, Social Farms and Gardens Development Trust Northern Ireland, talking about access to land. That led to our wing event, the first wider interest network group in May, where we had a wide range of people, where we talked about what would be good, what needs people wanted us to look at. And the ping emerged from that. So we did some consultation with key partners in July and August with Sustainable Food Places, Shared Assets and Sustain in particular. That led to an exploratory ping session in September with Sustainable Food Places and Shared Assets in the room. We're now here. Next week, we've got a further ping number 2 with COP26 again, and then presentations from Lancaster City Council and Food Futures. So the idea of having the council and the activists in the same room is emerging. So today we've got Sheffield, next week we've got Lancaster. Next year, we've got 2 further ones, 22nd of February, 29th of April, where we're looking at planning, mapping. We'll have Food Farming Countryside Commission, and then we'll look at diversity, leading on to a second wing in May, when we'll look at if exemplars are good practice and a policy call to action for the future. And that could be, say, what do we do in response to COP26? What do we do before COP27? There's an additional Northern Ireland number 4 coming up in January as well. And in parallel with all that, we've got work with Food Policy Alliance Cymru and Scottish Community Growing Forum. So we haven't ignored them. They've got their own mechanisms. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to finish my bit on this, establishing an Office of Urban Agriculture. So on the 7th of October, New York City Council established this Office of Urban Agriculture to promote and expand urban agriculture. And so this is all written out for us in black and white. This is what we need in every town and city in this country. So that's my bit. I'm really pleased to welcome Duncan Williamson from Nourish. Next slide. And over to you, Duncan.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk you through sort of some of the food and agricultural outcomes from COP26, which are relevant to the local food action we're going. I'm going to touch on big events happening in 2022, and then a bit more about the Glasgow Food Declaration and what that's going to be doing next. So COP26 is, I'm sure you know, one of the 3 global COPs. You've got the one on climate, the one on land use, and the one on biodiversity. They're all meant to be mutually supportive, but the one on climate up to now has always focused on energy and travel, and it's not really talked about food and agriculture. COP26, it still didn't talk about food and agriculture, I'm ashamed to say. We've been trying for at least 15 years, and it's still not prominent on the agenda. So there's always a challenge there. However, lots of things did happen around COP26 which are relevant. And there is a growing recognition amongst national governments and in the COP process that agriculture and food systems are both part of the problem when it comes to climate change, but are also a significant part of the solution. So, for example, in the final text, there was very nearly a specific mention to the role of agroecology. And this was supported by the EU, this was supported by many of the least developing countries. However, countries like India and the US objected to having agroecology in the text, so it wasn't in there formally. I can't tell you what the UK position was because the UK position was a bit opaque. So I'm not sure whether they're in favour of agroecology in the climate text or not. However, this is very important because there is a commitment to work on this and to include agroecology at the next COP in Egypt in 2022. And it's very much a representation of the existing battle in these global areas between the industrial agricultural model and the agroecological model. There is a power struggle going on, and it keeps going one way or the other, though I would argue the agroecological model is starting to move forward. And there was also, from the text, which I think is really important, for the first time ever, a recognition of the need to protect and restore nature and ecosystems. And that was linking that to climate change. And that is really important when it comes to food farming and what we're all working on. To have that in there as a specific recognition is groundbreaking and is potentially a game-changing solution. And another part of, though most of national governments have failed when it comes to climate change and have failed when it comes to food and farming, particularly in relation to climate change. They don't like talking about it. They don't like bringing it into the discussion. They would rather focus on technological solutions. Many governments have committed to net zero. So net zero is net zero emissions by 2050. And if we are going to achieve net zero, our food systems are going to be key, and agriculture is going to be absolutely key to delivering food systems. So there will be increasing recognition of the role of agriculture and local food systems in delivering net zero, which I also think is very, very exciting. So there were a couple of things that came out which are directly relevant to what we're doing. So the biggest one was the global methane pledge. This caught everyone by surprise. It's the first time methane has particularly been looked at. And methane is a very, very, very powerful greenhouse gas. It's also very short-lived. And the recognition is that we won't hit our targets for 1.5 degrees without tackling methane. But if we really want to kickstart the reduction, we start reducing methane now, and the results will be seen very, very quickly. And the focus of this pledge is going to be the energy sector and the agriculture sector. And the agricultural sector, I mean rice and livestock, particularly cows, sheep, dairy cows. The goal is to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. And it's led by the US, but the EU has also got involved. And what we know is that both at the EU level, the Common Agricultural Policy, and in the UK payments will shift to reflect this commitment to reduce methane within the agricultural system. So we will look at how that plays out for subsidies, but it will impact quite considerably, because it's not a case of offsetting by planting trees. It actually means we have to reduce methane within the farming system. So, and then there was the other policy, which I personally got excited about, was there is a commitment for a policy for a just transition to sustainable food and agriculture. And just transition is really important when we're looking at local foods. It's about making sure that the shift to sustainable food doesn't impact on people. It makes sure that people, farmers, communities benefit from a change to a new food system, not a system that changes and leaves people behind. And this is going to be including things like repurposing subsidies in the UK. It's going to look at how can we invest in research and development to secure food that benefits livelihoods and the environment and benefits citizens. And then how can this all work to deliver healthy food for everyone? So there's not a lot of clarity around it. It came in at the last minute, but it's very exciting, and the UK government has signed up to it and is one of the governments that leads on this. So it's a really important one for the work we're doing. So going into the future, out of it, there's not a lot to get really excited about from the direct negotiations, but all around the event, I was fortunate to be there. lots of people were talking about food and farming, lots of people talking about local solutions, lots and lots of people were discussing it. There was a lot of tribalism, that you had the people saying you have to give up meat, it's all about plant-based. You had a lot of people saying everyone should be eating more meat, meat can be carbon positive. You had everything in between and a lot of arguments, but you also had a lot of people talking about the need to move to local solutions, how cities and regions need to look locally to secure food from that, and how we need to start investing in things like urban agriculture, how we need to educate people, how we need to work on procurement and look at dynamic procurement. And I've been going to climate change COP since 2009. And I've never seen so many people engaged in food and farming, particularly the young people. They were the youth representatives were passionate about this and they got it. So I was really excited to see them and actually see them taking older generations like myself to task for not doing enough. And in 2022, it's worth mentioning that the UK is still holding the climate change COP leadership, and it's passing it over to Egypt. And there's a commitment this year to start delivering on the commitments that came out of COP. And the UK government has been very, very clear that climate and nature are mutually supportive. It has pushed this. It has been the leading organisation on this. So it's a great opportunity to start talking about climate and nature together. And to have a government that gets this is fantastic. They're supporting nature-based solutions. So there's a great opportunity there. And as alongside the COP, climate COP, in April, you're going to have the conventional biological diversity, the biodiversity COP, which is probably more important because in that COP, they're going to decide the next 10 years of targets at a national level for biodiversity restoration. Every country that signs up to it must restore biodiversity, must protect biodiversity. This biodiversity COP is all about food. Food is all over it, and it's going to be so important. And the UK government is starting to support this biodiversity COP. And it's really important for the UK because the UK is getting a lot of criticism at the moment because we have some of the lowest biodiversity in the world in the UK. We also have the lowest tree cover, original tree cover in Europe, in the UK. And a lot of this has been due to building materials and our farming system. So there is going to be a change, and there's an appetite at local level, citizen level and government level to look at this. So finally, what does this all mean for the Glasgow Declaration? Well, the Glasgow Declaration was an 18-month process where we got cities from all over the world to sign up to a commitment to healthy, sustainable food that will be climate smart. The Glasgow Declaration website has it all. The cities that signed up, we had over 100 cities. We had Manchester, we had Leeds, we had Lancaster. They all signed up to the Glasgow Declaration. And it's really, and the purpose of it is we recognise that national governments were failing on food, on local food and empowering the solutions, but local governments get it. And this ambition has over 100 cities. We handed it in at COP. It has been picked up by many, and it's cities and regions saying they're committed to supporting local food, citizens have access to healthy food, and to support farmers to produce the food and have access to the cities. And to have that many countries represented and that many cities signing up to it, it shows there's a massive appetite for change. This has been handed over. We're going to pass it over and see if we can find someone else to pick up on it and deliver the next stage of it in Egypt in 2022. And it's not the end of it, it's the next stage on a process. It started in Milan. There's also been a Barcelona declaration. Now we've done the Glasgow Declaration. It's very exciting. And every year it's getting easier and easier to sign up to it, and people are getting more and more involved. And it's fantastic. And the other thing we did was we had these things called the Fork to Farm dialogues, which I was fortunate to manage a lot of them. And these are processes where we got farmers, citizens, and local government to talk to each other. And you may think that's an obvious idea, but when we did it, it came about because the founder of Nourish Scotland, Pete Ritchie, is a farmer. And what he said is that when he's been working, farmers don't really talk to people that much, and people don't really talk to farmers. And he doesn't understand why, because they're always talking about food and they're always talking about the need to work together, but they don't talk to each other. So the idea about this was let's talk to each other. And then we decided, let's talk to local authorities in this as well. Local government, we had these dialogues in about 60 countries. And it was the same thing. Local government controls a lot of the access to food. They look at some of the policies, whether it's planning, procurement, etc. But they don't talk to farmers, or not everyone talks to farmers. They don't always talk to food systems. So we set up these dialogues as a process of creating a space for people to talk to each other. It was anyone who came along was welcome. You could be a big farmer, a small farmer, a horticulturalist, a livestock farmer. It could be anyone. You could be from any department in local government. You could also be a councillor, and you could also be you could be anything. You could be me in the street wanting to be interested. You could be a local food poverty group. It could be anyone. And these dialogues went really well. We've had dialogues all over the world. It's the purpose of these purely is to build trust. And these dialogues have started to build trust. We already know that some of them are going on after the event. We had a global dialogue on the event. Some of them are going on after. Some of them, like one in my area, has only just started, but it's a template for people to follow. And from what we've seen is it can take a bit of time to start the dialogues, but once they start, people start understanding each other a lot more, and they want to be in the room together to co-create solutions, to get out of the silo approach where different people aren't talking to each other, but they're promoting solutions which sometimes work together, but are sometimes antagonistic. And these are going to keep going on. We're hoping they'll keep going on. We've got the model. We're working on the next stage of it as we speak. And we hope these will keep happening. And to show how powerful they were, at COP, we had a global dialogue where I hosted a session where I had farmers and the dialoguers and farmers from Nairobi in the room. I had farmers and dialogue from Nigeria in the room. I had all remotely, a fishing community from the Philippines, a group from Aberdeen, and a group from Bristol, all talking to each other, all sharing their experiences of food, farming, and their local environment, all getting equally frustrated by exactly the same things, which was how they're not being supported in their decision making, but all with an equal passion to work together and to commit to delivering sustainable food systems, and all made a promise to keep in touch and share their learnings. It was a truly wonderful experience. So yeah, so that's a quick run through of COP26 down to the dialogues. I hope it's been useful. If you've got any questions, just ask. Thank you.
Absolutely great. Thanks so much, Duncan. From somebody who sort of followed COP from a distance, my impression was it was it certainly wasn't as successful as we wanted it to be, but neither was it a failure, as some people have tried to portray. And I think from hearing from you, who was actually there and heavily involved in the preparation of the Glasgow Declaration, that's really thoughtful and really gives us a lot to think about. And if anybody's interested in this, we're going to have another session on this, perhaps in a bit more detail at the meeting on the 30th of November, which is next Tuesday. We'll come on to that in a minute. So we're going to move on for the next slide, please.
Just to highlight that there's a question from Timothy in the chat. Do you want to raise it now, or do you want to?
I think I'd like to carry on, if we may, because if we get through the presentations, then we'll see how much time we've got left. I'm very grateful that Alison Teal and Gareth have joined us. So if we don't mind, if we move on,
sure, we'll come to that.
Yeah. So just to introduce, we've been working with Gareth in Sheffield probably since about 2017, 2018, and when I first had a meeting with himself and other people in Sheffield, saying, who should we talk to in the city council? He sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, we have got no traction. But that has changed enormously. So I'm really pleased that Alison Teal is here. And over to you, Alison.
Sorry, thanks, Jeremy. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour, if you like, about how conditions did change in Sheffield from what they were in 2017. And
Alison, sorry to interrupt. Do you have any slides, or would you like us to stop sharing?
Yeah, we can just be as a group, or just Gareth and I, or something like that. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So every local authority is very much unique, and so Sheffield's been through its own particular transformation, if you like, the way that things are happening as a local authority now. And that started pretty much with probably the most infamous period of our history, which was the Sheffield Trees campaign. And what happened is Sheffield City Council signed up a PFI agreement with a multinational company. It's called Amy, and Ferrovial are the parent company. And they essentially took ownership of all the streets that we have, and they were responsible for maintenance, replacement of street signs and curbs and all this sort of thing. And they're also tasked with relaying new roads. So it's a very, very large contract, a very lucrative contract. In 2000, that happened in 2012. In 2015, some people, including myself, had the consequences of this maintenance contract come to the area that they live in, the neighbourhood of Netheredge and Sharrow. And various healthy trees were scheduled to be felled. And it was all seemed very incomprehensible, and we started to react against it. And we had basically 3 years of fighting off multinational and our local authority and the police as well, using non-violent direct action to try to protect healthy trees. We lost over 5,000 trees, but there were over 17,000 scheduled to be felled. So we actually did quite well to stop them around the 5,000 mark. So what this did was it created a tremendous grassroots campaign where people became very, very interested in their local authority, and they had an opportunity to flex their muscles, if you like, and actually discover that we could be powerful if we work together, because we did manage to stop it. So despite High Court injunctions, multiple arrests, you know, and just an incredible amount of effort and stress and financial losses, etc., that the community won out. And this was superb. It was, we didn't discover it. There wasn't one day when we knew that we'd won. It was sort of over a period of time. But what it spawned was this very, very strong interest in the local authority and what power people had and what power the council had and how the power worked. And it was discovered that we had this, we have a strong leader model, which was came about as the result of the Localism Act in 2011, which meant that there's a strong leader and a cabinet model. And essentially, out of 84 councillors, only 10 of those councillors actually had a say in how the city was being run. And people understandably didn't think that this sounded right, because, you know, everyone has sort of 3 councillors in their local area. And yet, oftentimes, you'd be voting for someone that it turned out that they didn't really have a say in what happened in the city. And this, you know, understandably created a lot of discontent. And so it brought about a campaign called It's Our City, which was a campaign for local democracy to create a committee system which would enable every councillor, every 84 councillors across the city, to have a say and to be able to influence what happened in the local neighbourhood and the wider city as well. The campaign was successful. It submitted a petition of over 26,000 signatures, which triggered a referendum, which was supposed to take place in 2020, but COVID stopped that. So it took place in May this year. And it was successful. And so now, as a local authority, we're being forced in a year's time to actually convert to the committee system, which will, again, the idea is to share power amongst the 84 councillors rather than have it contained within the 10. And the other expectation is that people really want to have a say. They really want to participate and be involved in what happens in their local community, which is absolutely fantastic. So also, as well as getting the referendum success, we also ended up with a hung council. So the Labour Party have always been very much in charge of Sheffield, largely for the majority of its history. There's just been a little blip where the Lib Dems had control for a couple of years. So what happened is then we had to enter into negotiations with the Labour and the Lib Dems to discuss how we're going to run the council, because no one group had sufficient seats to be able to run the council. So the Green Party, we've agreed that the 3 of us would be take exec roles, and there would be 7 Labour. So they still have a majority and still can have a lot of the control. But what it's done is it's changed the atmosphere and changed the way that the council's working now. And one of the really good things, of course, is that other things have all been happening at the same time. So of course we've got COP26 was coming up, which really had raised the profile. We've got Extinction Rebellion, we've got, you know, the Kids Fridays for a Future, and there's been a lot more activity around the climate crisis. And of course, as Greens, we've been very much supporting, promoting, and trying to get action on the climate and nature emergency for many, many years. And so it's really coloured the whole executive now and the council, and we're really starting to have an influence in improving the way the council's looking at things, thinking more systemically. And that includes, of course, food. And this is where Gareth comes in. So Gareth, I've known him for a few years, and I've been a great admirer of the work that Regather's been doing, and starting to learn more, and been very interested myself in food growing and urban food production. And so, of course, Gareth was the person that I looked to for more information about that. So I learned about the Chef Food Partnership. And what's happened now is, we're starting to work together, because I'm the executive lead for parks and countryside and ecology, and so there's, you know, potential for me to help him access land and also access funding. So we've got some funding now through the public health grant, which is also in my portfolio, to create a position that is going to enable us to make a lot of progress. So that might be a good point for you to pick up now, Gareth, and explain how it's all going to work. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. A superb job of covering about 10 or 12 years very quickly. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think when Jeremy and Maddie invited us to join the session today, we sort of scratched our heads and think, yeah, how on earth are we going to best approach this? So we're sort of trying to piece together a bit of a timeline. So obviously, as you've heard from Alison, they're much more focused on community, grassroots democracy, mobilisation, and you know how that's sort of connecting into the local authority at the highest level. In parallel to that, over a sort of similar time frame, I'm just going to highlight the food side of the story, because whilst certain aspects did certainly start with the street trees, we have to also acknowledge a significant community food movement in Sheffield that has existed, for me, I feel, for at least 40 odd years. And for me, the institution that spans most of that time period is Healy City Farm. And, it's a much loved city institution that came out of an absolutely unbelievable kind of context of dual carriageway being built and housing demolished, and city farms springing up from the rubble. But what we have now, and what the city benefits from massively, is a city farm that is a kind of a key reference point. Now, there's many other community food organisations in the city, not as old as Healy City Farm, but certainly as relevant. And obviously, as times changed, that movement has, if you like, coordinated, organised, mobilised in a whole range of different ways. A key development in that is the Sustainable Food Cities, now Sustainable Food Places network, and the role that that has played nationally in convening food partnerships across the country. Now, in Sheffield, I think there's also some really important influences historically from the Making Local Food Work programme, and also the transition movement, where we saw a critical mass of people at a grassroots level engage in addressing the climate emergency, the challenges around food system sustainability, and increasingly actually how that addresses some of the really in sort of integral inequalities that the city faces, both in terms of economy and health, and how that relates to the food system. So yeah, all around this period, that connection with the economy has been certainly at the forefront of the work that we've been doing here at Regather. So we formed as a cooperative in about 2010, and we've had an involvement in food partnership activity in the city. Actually, if you really look at the detail, before Regather even existed, I was helping organise food conferences and the like. But we've been there at the heart of that development. We're incredibly proud, and we feel genuinely privileged to be able to share a space with so many different organisations and very passionate people. And essentially, it's that has been the driving force that has kept that community food movement going. Now, where these sort of two timelines converge, I think we're going to sort of pick up on COVID and the emergence of COVID, particularly March 2020 onwards, and a lot of there's just mobilisation on the scale of which I mean, this is no exception for Sheffield. This is something that happened wholesale, but in Sheffield, lived experience was of community mobilisation, mutual aid groups, networks forming around food banks, emergency food provision, organisations like Voluntary Action Sheffield, Together for Sheffield, and Sheffield City Council working together in a way that certainly in my experience just simply hadn't happened in that way before. And for example, if you take the Together for Sheffield food provision meeting, that became a weekly Zoom group with a whole range of organisations and individuals present and really engaging in the coordination of emergency food provision. And we saw this kind of convergence of both the questions around food security and food system sustainability, which has continued since then, really. And much more recently, if you go onto the Sustainable Food Places website, you find the Sheffield City page, then there is a substantial document which pulls together all of this activity, because the city won a bronze award from Sustainable Food Places in earlier this year. And that was a significant milestone, that celebrated and recognised this long history of food activism in Sheffield. And it's that connection of that food activism with the political will and support that has now sort of become manifest in what the council is now doing, and how it's made up of different parties, and this shift from the strong leader model to the committee system next year, that's created an environment. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily a policy environment just yet. I'd say it's an environment of aspiration, of intention, and of action, because there is and always has been a huge amount of food action. But this is the challenge as we move forward. How is it that a food partnership supported by Sustainable Food Places at a national level, can interact with the local authority and increasingly the regional mayor's combined authority at a South Yorkshire level, with then a whole range of stakeholders at institutional level, our two universities, all of our health and social care bodies, through to civic society, private business, social enterprise, third sector organisations, and grassroots activities, and importantly, to say individuals, in their homes, at a household level, at a neighbourhood level. How is it, that all of these things can be brought together to address what is, I think, the most significant challenge that we face, in the climate emergency, our sustainability of the food system. So these are the big questions. And I just wanted to say a bit about Duncan's appraisal of COP26. I mean, I like Jeremy, I've sort of kind of watched from a distance, really thinking, oh gosh, this is just incomprehensible. The scale and also certain aspects of what seemed to be not happening was deeply frustrating. But there is definitely hope. And the question, just going back, the key question is how is it that we make these things happen at a local and regional level? Now, I think for Sheffield, our experience, collectively between people like myself and Alison and Fran Housel, and I'm not going to start naming names because the list is way too long, and I'm bound to miss someone out. But it's basically how is it that we can galvanize that level of interest and support and turn that into policy, because that's at the heart of the challenge. And if we take, for example, Sheffield City Council passed a motion at full council in early September of this year, dubbed the Right to Food. So this was a Labour group led motion. It included amendments from the Green group, and as an outsider to the council, what this represents is a significant development. It's there as a full council motion. It's in the public domain. I'm sure we can get some links shared. It's a statement of intent. It follows many years of work happening in the city to tackling both poverty and specifically food poverty. But very importantly, it also specifically addresses questions around the development of a food strategy for Sheffield, and urban agriculture, agroecological food production, and a whole range of issues. So we've still got a long way to go. We're on a journey, but we are where we are because of this kind of convergence of local democracy in action and community food activism, and those two converging. I feel that's where the action's at. So I'm going to hand back to Jeremy.
There we go. Alison, did you want to add anything at that point? She's gone off to get a cup of tea. Right. We're at 2:15, which is actually halfway through the whole session. So that's pretty good timing. Thanks everyone for that. Right. That's really interesting place to be at. We've got 19 people in the room, 19 people at the moment. So Maddie and I are just deciding whether we're going to have a breakout session or stick in one big group for a discussion. So what should we do, Maddie?
Well, I quite like, maybe within this number of people, it'd be really nice for everyone to hear everybody else.
Yeah.
And then we can sort of capture it in the recording as well.
Okay.
I think, yeah, it'd be great if people wanted to turn their cameras on if they wanted to, bearing in mind it is recording, so that's obviously optional. And yeah, we kind of, should we do some questions as they've come up while they're fresh in people's minds, and then have a, maybe pose more of a kind of leading question for us all to have a discussion on. All
right, so that's the suggestion, that we, rather than going to breakout rooms and waste a load of time and energy, we'll stick in one big space and have a round robin. There's a couple of questions in the chat already. I'll just flick up to those, but just reflecting on a couple of things. Duncan talked about the Glasgow Declaration, and as an NGO, if you don't know this already, you can actually sign it as a third sector organisation, as a supporter. So if you haven't done that, we have. Urban Agriculture Consortium, I think, was one of the first NGO type organisations to sign it. Lots of other people have as well, including, interestingly, the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, who fund a lot of our work. That's interesting. And I know Bristol City Council have also signed it. And you mentioned Healy City Farm, and I'd be wrong to not say how many times I've been there in my previous job with the Federation of City Farms. And I see that Mick Marston is in the room, and he will no doubt pass on your warm wishes to John LeCorney, Gareth. Anyway, sorry. Right, so let's have a look. There's a couple of questions from Timothy. Timothy, do you want to read your questions out?
Thank you. Yes. So what I'm interested in, and I'll just provide a bit of a pretext, what I'm interested in is the fact that we're probably fighting a bit of a rearguard action, trying to improve some inner city spaces and also what we're proposing around rural areas when urbanization and increases in transport infrastructure are taking place, so that we're actually diminishing the green space. We can obviously have a conversation about what optimal ratios are, but it's difficult to argue a whole range of things to improve the environment while it continues unabated. And so I wanted to get an appreciation, certainly amongst the folk here today, about what understanding exists around that threat to both biodiversity, increases in atmospheric carbon, be it methane and carbon dioxide, and the greenhouse impact of that. The fact we compromise tree cover, I mean, it's quite galling, frightening, anger-inducing to hear about the Sheffield position. How is there an appreciation or a quantitation of how that compares to the level of risk to environmental impact that we get from the existing rural activity, so farming? Because at the moment, it does feel as though everybody's looking to the green spaces to provide the solution and ignoring the expansion of urban development and the impact that's having. And so when I listen to the conversation we're having today, fantastic stuff being done, but it does feel it's a small reconciliation for what's going on basically elsewhere.
Okay, Timothy, do you mind telling us where you're from? Are you representing yourself or an organisation?
Yes, I think I'm representing myself, actually. I mean, I am involved with a number of different organisations, but representing myself, I'm a livestock farmer in West Yorkshire.
Aha. Okay, Gareth had his finger up, his hand up.
Yeah, I don't mind. I think Tim's posing a very interesting question, which I'm going to try and interpret from the perspective of our work at Regather here in Sheffield. And yeah, I mean, yeah, our struggle, extensive over a period of years, to kind of find our way into horticultural food production, access to land, the right kind of capital and skilled labour, plus the right market conditions for a business to function, it has been long-standing. But obviously, at some point, that involved accessing, the right kind of land in a rural or peri-urban, I think, probably given the distance from the city, in that particular type of location. So that is about the change of or use within agricultural, uses, from arable to market garden, organic, intensive horticulture, these various different labels applied to that. But we're competing with housing, horses. We're competing with commodity, food production, which until obviously with the changes of Brexit and so on, we're receiving substantial amounts of subsidy from Europe. Now, the idea of expanding that as much as we would love to, and further, putting pressure on rural land, the realities are that's very challenging. And so for us, particularly given where we are, as a city, and where our population is and where the market is, it's actually the urban, the spaces in the urban areas that are where we are looking to for increasing levels of food productivity. So there's a huge amount of opportunity in that sort of in those sorts of areas using a wide range of production techniques, that are actually, more likely, certainly in the sort of short to medium term, to become viable than, as much as I hate to admit it, than it is for us to maybe find, another 5, 10, 100, 500 hectares, of rural land that we can, move over to organic horticulture, for example. So I think there's a huge amount of pressure that means we're really having to move much more within existing urban space than we are necessarily going to be putting, much more pressure than there already is on rural land.
Yeah.
If I could just chip in on this, it's interesting to kind of zooming right out that we're very sort of absorbed in the world of food systems change, but there's a kind of equally amazing and compelling movement going on about what are the urban areas of the future. We have overshot 6 of our planetary boundaries. We have to be thinking about a post-carbon urbanism, and that's an enormous rethink, and there's all kinds of work going on globally around that, around the what is a regenerative settlement, and what about the urban sort of metabolism, reimagining resource flows, and how do you decarbonize a city and make it a place that keeps the regenerating rural hinterland full of life, and how the sort of urban and the rural start to come back into sort of symbiotic relationship with each other. And so there are living landscapes. It's not that all the people are in the urban spaces and there's nobody in the green spaces, a bit like it is now. It's also about people coming back into the regenerative land work, and having a more kind of symbiotic relationship. So that's an interesting part of what's going on globally now as well. Duncan.
Yes, thank you. No, I agree with everything that's said. I'm just going to add some things that we're seeing, and so thinking local solutions, but also thinking regionally at the same time. We've got to think of urban and rural in one. They're very, very intertwined. But if you're looking at urban settings, there's some really easy, good things that can happen for nature, for carbon, that can take pressure off nature. So, for example, you ban fake grass. It's a really easy win. There's no need for it, and it's destroying biodiversity, and it's causes climate change, because you're not allowing grass to absorb CO2 emissions. You stop cutting verges. You let grass grow. You let wildflowers grow. You ban people concreting over front gardens, which is just crazy. It causes flooding, but it's also really bad from a carbon and a biodiversity perspective. They're no-brainers that should be in place. Then it's also looking at bringing trees back into cities, because trees in cities not only help tackle air pollution and carbon, they also cool a city. And as climate change hits, there are countless studies which show where trees are, that part of the city is always cooler than where trees are not. So they'll help with urban cooling, and they're free. So instead of spending loads of money trying to keep people cool, have trees. It's a no-brainer again. And they work, and they also improve people's well-being. And then when you're looking at things like trees, if you are going to do a tree planting initiative, wherever it is, you have to put in place a management plan, because everyone is talking about trees, plant trees, but no one puts in place a 30-year management plan. If you don't put in place a 30-year management plan, your tree planting is going to fail, because trees work very slowly. Very, very slowly. And what's happened is nearly all the tree planting schemes so far have failed, because people have planted the trees and then walked away going, look at me, I've done something, pat myself on the back. So, but again, people don't like to think in terms of 30 years. So that's important. But when we're looking at what the rural, the other thing I'd say as well is a lot of people are saying there's lots of pressure to build more houses. So when you look at the evidence, the UK doesn't have a housing problem. The UK has a wrong sort of housing problem. We have 2 million empty homes. We have about 1 million second homes and holiday homes. And most of the houses that are being built at the moment are not affordable homes for the right numbers. They're 3 and 4 bedroom desirable developments on the edge of towns or in floodplains. So we need to start building the right homes in the right places, not the wrong homes that fit certain people. And then when we look at the rural regional thing, and again, our founder, Pete Ritchie, is a livestock farmer in Scotland, the Scottish borders, and he's passionate about this. So it's things like, let's work with farmers because they are so important in providing so many ecosystem services. And can we work with them on things like agroforestry? Can we look at what we can do with them to encourage them to keep doing what they're doing so well, and then support them as they bring in more agro environmental benefits onto their farms, because they're really good at what they're doing. We also, and if we're going to look at land that has to be taken for nature or for urban expansion or whatever, let's take farmland out of the equation. It's so important to keep farmland. It has to be there. There are other areas of land which serve no purpose other than to a few people. And what we know is some areas of land, there's a group of, so for example, in Surrey, we have more golf courses, more land put aside for golf courses than we have for nature reserves. A golf course, they tend to be very low value from an ecological point of view. The grass is crept too short. There's lots of problems with them. They only serve a small group of community. They're very important from an exercise point of view, but there's other things you can do. So look at things like golf courses first, which, if you're going to look at a benefit for the majority, not for the minority. There's other things like there's a debate going on at the moment around the role of horses and paddocks and how some prime grazing land is turned over to horses. And horses, again, tend to be for a very small community who are very influential, who love their horses. And I come from a horse riding family. I don't ride anymore, but I grew up riding horses. But they take a lot of land for 1 or 2 animals. So there's other land that can be used first, or work with those groups like golf courses, horses, to rewild as much of it as possible. And then you've got the land left over to work with the farmers, to support the extensive livestock farming, to support horticulture. So there are lots of solutions out there. Some are very low cost, some are very, very, very easy to do, but they just take the willpower to do it and the thinking to do it. And every time people have started to approach these things like the urban solutions, they have shown remarkably quick benefit, and they're not opposed by communities. Communities like them if you tell them what you're doing and why.
Can I just jump in there? Really interesting that you mentioned 30 years. And in one of my previous jobs, I was a cycling campaigner and transport campaigner for Friends of the Earth, and then for Sustrans. And we used to go to meetings with planners, and they'd say, or transport planners, and they'd say, you can't possibly change this, and we'd say, well, we're not looking at you doing it by next year. We're looking 30 years down the road. And actually, if you take the way that cycling has partially come into mainstream now, only partially, it's a damn sight more prominent than it used to be, and space is slowly being taken back from the car, given to pedestrians and cycling. And that brings us back to the 15-minute city thinking that we mentioned earlier on, 20-minute city, and that whole move back towards localism. We're not going to solve it overnight, but it's a maybe 25, 30-year process. That means we also have to bring in a lot of younger people, because some people like me aren't going to be doing this for 30 years, And I think the fact that Duncan mentioned young people in his feedback was really significant. One of the things our movement has to grapple with, and how are we going to bring people in meaningfully, so they have a voice, so they have a genuine place. And I think it was somebody, I can't remember who after COP, somebody said young people have the moral authority to do this, to change things. So, and just by complete fluke, and in another previous job, I wrote a guide to wilding golf courses at the London Wildlife Trust back in the 80s. So there you go. Maddie, it's 2:30. Should we try and pose a couple of questions for discussion?
Yeah, certainly. I just want to come to another one that's in the chat that Timothy put in there as well, which is a really great question. Do you want to say that one yourself, Timothy?
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah. So, and it segues quite nicely from the conversation we just had, because when we talk about young people, we're often talking about the people who are more sensitized and enthused about the idea of improving the environment. But people who are in low incomes, poverty, poor housing, can't see beyond the immediate pressures on their life. But one of the great things that everybody needs is food. High quality food doesn't mean expensive, but high quality food where you know where it's come from. It's a greater democracy if it's local, because you see the land on which it's grown and could even have a view and input into that. And that improved provenance allows you to understand better how food is produced and put value on it, which people have become dissociated from, I would argue. And one of the best ways of doing that is through schools. When I grew up, you know, we learned about these things at school, about where the food came from and how it was produced and the value to a certain degree, and that's diminished over time. If I talk to people under the age of 20, there's a significant dissociation from where food comes from. And although I'm slightly biased on this issue, and I'll declare it, when one talks about new animal proteins or synthetic proteins, people think that's an acceptable addition to a repertoire to keep the workforce going, if you like. And I can only see big business behind that, but I can't see real human beings enjoying it necessarily. But I think, you know, if there's opportunities around food activism at schools to get people interested in their food and where it comes from, it's got to be a good place to go. So my question very simply was, given what we've heard about Sheffield, has this happened to any degree? And if not, are there plans for it to happen, and what sort of shape would it take? Thanks.
I'm just going to jump in, but I think Alison might also want to contribute. Yeah, it's another great question, Timothy. Thank you. In Sheffield specifically, we have got an organisation called Learn Sheffield, and they've been running a multi-year programme in conjunction with Food for Life called Eat Smart Sheffield, and that does address a number of school-focused or school setting-focused food-related issues. So whether that's school dinners or curriculum content in the curriculum or other sort of out-of-school activities, and that sort of branched out further. With Lisa Aldwin, she writes a regular column in the Sheffield Star every Wednesday in the food and drink section. So it just, that kind of gives you an indication of a certain level of activity. Certainly the climate emergency, as you've mentioned, has really seen a massive mobilisation of young people, and that's led to a South Yorkshire schools climate conference that was held earlier this year. It's planned again for 2022, and obviously food has been a significant presence at those events. So I mean, there's always room for more. There's lots of activity that I've not mentioned that involves schools and is all about food as well. But the last thing I'll mention is, along with Alison, who's with us today, another councillor who's played a sort of an important role in kind of getting the momentum going is Julie Grocer. And I will always recall a conversation with Julie early on in the kind of this sort of current new, what I would describe a bit of a new era in council sort of relations. But yeah, Julie just recalled how during her younger years, growing up and living in Sheffield, her experience of learning about food and food growing and cooking in her local school, and Julie just reflecting on how that just doesn't happen, but desperately needs to happen much more widely. So I think pretty much everybody, you know, if you ask them, do you want the planet to kind of like no longer function and support human life within 20, 30, 40 years, pick a number, whatever, you know, everybody's going to say, yeah, I'd really like it to kind of carry on supporting human life, please. Yeah, but then there's the sort of devil's in the detail, isn't it? You know, and how we turn that into meaningful action and policy. And, you know, and obviously that's the tricky bit. And that's what we've seemed to be having the most difficulty with. But yeah, on a personal level, I mean, everyone's on board, right? So it's got to be easier than it is. Alison, come on, jump in.
Well, with regard to schools, and you've already mentioned Learn Sheffield and what they've done, but I'm pretty confident there's probably a lot more could be done. I know that we've got some schemes that Public Health run. And that's obviously focused on issues such as obesity and also programs like Move More. And so there's a lot of public health activity around improving people's well-being, and that of course includes food very much as part of that. And there's also the Forest Schools movement, which is really growing in Sheffield as well. And that's it's not just about sort of planting trees, it's also about growing food, and that's something that more community groups are doing as well. And I imagine it's happened right across the country. There was a huge demand for allotments during COVID. A lot of people have become very, very interested in growing food, not just for fear of shortages, but also just wanting to feel more connected with nature, and any reason to be outside. I think that was sort of drove that quite a lot. And so we've got a very, very big increase in demand for allotments, and also a definite increase in community food growing. And so the council's looking at altering its policies around allotments and enabling small community groups to run allotments rather than just individuals like it used to be. So I think children are getting much more involved in food growing, but I absolutely agree with Timothy that I think that we could do a really good job of improving education around food in schools. But I'm not a teacher. I'm not sure what's happening on the ground right now, but it's certainly something that I will be encouraging for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, you were just NRFC team. I can't remember.
Fine. Yeah, it's just to quickly say, in Lancaster, we're on to that. We've got 4 pilot schools at the moment, and we're working with them and the head teachers, and they've got whatever land they've got. We will be using that for their own growing sites, and there will be cooking and all the kids involved, and it's going really well. There's loads of engagement, loads of interest. We cover Morecambe as well, so we'll be rolling it out to every school in the district. It's growing that fast. Yeah, we're definitely onto it, and it is essential work.
Thank you. And Connor has just also said in the chat. Do you want to say that? Read that out, Connor, or do you want me to?
You might be easier to understand, Mary.
It's fine. It's not feeding back like it was yesterday as well. It's
okay.
Good. Yeah. But I can if you like. Connor was just saying we've worked with a local primary school in Derry to put in a 1 metre square raised bed for each family in the school. So that's 86 beds, with a small grant from an acronym that I don't know what it means. LHLA.
Love here, love here. Okay.
The children are integrating food with their curriculum and celebrations throughout the year. So building in that seasonality and cyclical nature of food. They're saving seed as well and loving the outdoor play. Their parents were involved in building the beds and come in to decorate and help every month or 2. Teachers are learning about this too, which is obviously essential. Irish Seed Savers have published a great guide to growing for the school year. And other people have already also said about the importance of kind of the role of working horses in the system, being really positive. Connor also said something about some interesting work in Northern Ireland with managing golf courses ecologically, and an all-Ireland pollinator plan is helping with that and integrating seaweed and so on. Yeah, so just in our last sort of 10 minutes, you know, we've got, yeah. So I'm sorry.
Can I pose a question, Maddie?
Yeah.
It's just I put a little thing in the chat, but I'm just conscious of the fact that, you know, along with Urban Agriculture Consortium, you know, there's sustainable food places comprising of you know, Sustain, the Soil Association and Food Matters. We've also got Land Workers Alliance, and I'm just sort of looking around. There's a couple of names that are familiar in the attendees, you know, who might also be aware of the new BBSRC supported programs as part of the Transforming the Food System. You know, so you've got the Fix Our Food led out of University of York, and you've got the H3 Healthy Soil, Healthy Food, Healthy People led out of the University of Sheffield, and these are significant research programs involving multiple institutions. So that, you know, that's a lot of activity at a national level. I mean, chuck in the national food strategy as well for you know, just for good measure. Never mind COP26 and so on. You know, so there's a plethora of national programs, and I just feel, you know, that there needs to be a sort of I think a coordinated approach, or maybe let's say a slightly better coordinated approach. So I think there is coordination. There's a lot of conversations that I'm certainly aware of, and there's probably many more that I'm not. But you know, where are we heading? You know, with this at a national level, and how does that then filter down to the regional and the local? Because it's quite a maze to navigate as somebody, as a food activist. You know, I'm sure you know, it raises lots of questions.
Yeah, okay, that's very well put. It was quite noticeable. I mentioned we've got a meeting on Tuesday the 30th. I'll finish off on that in a minute. At the same time, Sustain have organised a meeting on on supply chains, and I can't remember who the other organisation is, but a related session is going on at the same time. And that's not because anyone's trying to trip anybody up. It's completely accidental. It's simply because no one's coordinating this wider movement. Now, whose job is that? I don't know. I mentioned that yesterday in the session on farm starts, and Sustain were in the room. And James, who was from Sustain, sort of went, oh yeah, but how are we going to do that? Well, an organisation with 2 part-time workers isn't going to do it. So don't look at me and Maddie, but I think an organisation with 40 or 50 part-time staff might be well placed to do it. And Sustain would be my nomination of choice, because they've got the status and the resources to do it. So somehow coordinating simple things like diaries, it would be a good start. When I spoke to Tom Andrews at Sustainable Food Places about the Policy Influencers Network concept, we wanted him, Sustain and Shared Assets in particular in the room, and we had a discussion, and delighted to say that Tom not only could see the value of the Policy Influencer Network group, he actually welcomed it as an additional tool in the arsenal of policy work. And he took part in the first ping session that was in September to give his endorsement to it. Next week, when we have the next ping meeting, Sustain, I know now, are trying to juggle their diary so that somebody can come along. But I think it's really important. What Tom also mentioned was that he and his colleagues are trying to set up a dialogue with the local government association, who actually, after all, are the trade union body for local authorities. Now, in my previous jobs, I've written a guide with other people on allotment policy growing in the community, which the LGA ended up publishing, and it's still, I think, available online. And I know Tom is trying to coordinate a policy level document or toolkit with the LGA, which would include agroecology, along with dynamic procurement and all the other aspects that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, we've got Food Farming Countryside Commission as well, who've written a really useful document on changing the dialogue, shifting the narrative. I can't quite remember what it's called. changing the food systems. And they're going to come along to the next meeting, a future meeting, and talk about that as well. So I couldn't agree more. There's great need for a coordination. Landworkers Alliance, you mentioned that we're coordinating with them at all. And I think, to be honest, what a lot of it is, the reason people don't coordinate is they simply haven't got enough time to put their heads above their own parapets, whatever those parapets are. And I feel Maddie and myself are in a very, very lucky, fortunate position that we can just cast our net quite widely, and people seem to be convening around it. Yeah, sorry, Gareth.
Well, it's the prioritization of food to the same level of, say, energy, transport, and housing that has to happen. And if there was a sort of a big picture message that needs, that's coming out of COP26, for me, that is it. Food, as we heard from Duncan, was there, but not to the extent it needed to be, and we're obviously playing catch up to many extents. But I think this same issue about the prioritization of food to the same level of, and I certainly in the Sheffield context, we would have to acknowledge poverty as a really key issue, but it can't sit on its own. It's not just like saying, well, there's poverty, there's transport, there's housing, there's energy, there's food. And this is the difference between the kind of siloed thinking and action that's not fixed these problems, that needs to be done away with. And we need a much more integrated systems approach to these challenges.
Thank you, Gareth. Yeah, I've got my first meeting with the West of England Combined Authority Mayor this afternoon in person, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, as well as about that integration and, between the Combined Authority and the constituent local authorities, but also horizontally. That's this work is calling people to do, is to step out. So thank you very much. I just wanted to, before we go back to the slides and close, just wanted to see if anybody else wanted to comment at all on anything that they've heard. Is there a tipping point that they feel is coming up where they are? What's your takeaway from what Duncan, Alison and Gareth and ourselves have brought? Anything like that? It would be lovely to just briefly hear from anybody who'd like to chip in.
Could I just say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things I haven't heard in this conversation, and we've covered an awful lot of ground, is just about the role of, if you like, economics and degrowth in the conversation, because a lot of the solutions to addressing the issues, as represented certainly through COP, were about new growth agendas, where new food sources, as I've alluded to before, are the solution. My worry is that those are seen as a panacea because essentially well-financed corporations are pushing them, and we end up with, rather like the Amazon warehouses by the motorway, new land being taken up to produce, highly concentrated, cheap food. And so I think linked with the degrowth agenda and quality food and addressing food poverty, those are not exclusive issues. People without much money shouldn't be getting cheap quality food, and actually introducing more democracy into food, so it's more visible where it's coming from. There's a closer link between the people consuming the food as to where it's produced. Also has impacts, beneficial impacts environmentally, but also in looking at economy in a different way. So maybe not in this session, but perhaps in future conversations, it'd be nice to hear more about economic considerations, because unless we shift the economic paradigm, we're going to be just doing the same stuff over and over again and creating new issues, I would suggest.
I think you're...
Timothy, just to add to that, Adrian mentioned before bioregions, and just flag up in response that Devon has been doing a really interesting process using the Kate Raworth's donut economics, where within planetary boundaries and the Sustainable Development Goals, there's this, how do we find this safe space for humanity? So it's working with a different kind of economic paradigm, and you can look up the Devon donut, and they're doing some really interesting sort of bioregional work around that.
That's hilarious. Being as I'm born in Devon, I think actually you call it the Devon dumpling. It should be called.
I'll lend you the book, Jeremy.
Yeah, okay. I'm not an economist, and I really don't pretend to understand things whatsoever, but I think what we are part of, whether hopelessly idealistic or not, is a movement of collectivism and community rather than consumerism and individualism. And unfortunately, the system, the paradigm we've got will always seek to replicate itself. And you can look at that. I was thinking about this the other day. I read an article about what is contained in processed plant-based food, and it said it's more or less as bad for you as meat-based processed food. So simply switching systems, switching the name on the box, doesn't mean the food is any better quality. So that's that system trying to replicate itself, and you can see the same thing happening in the transport system as well. However, that's for another day, as you say. Adrian Lovett's put a couple of good, excellent comments in. Oh, my dog's just coming. It must be nearly 3 o'clock. Maddie, can we just go back to the final few slides? I
don't have. I'm not controlling them.
Can somebody
get them up for you?
Yeah. NRFC will be recording. We'll be putting this recording up as soon as they're able to, which will include the chat as well, I assume.
Yes, it will.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just to finish off, thanks to everybody for taking the time to come to this meeting. It's been really dynamic and interesting, and goes way beyond my comfort zone in some instances. We've got a couple of final slides, if we can have those. Otherwise, I can't remember what I wrote. Okay. In the meantime, then, okay, here we go. Thank you. So we just summarize briefly where the Urban Agriculture Consortium is going next. And this depends on resources, even with the limited resources we've got. This is what we're going to try and do. Consolidate and further expand, deepen our work with the Northern Pathfinder Cluster. Slowly or gently expand the perimeter, and we're looking at starting conversations with the Midlands Cluster. It may not be the same. Just yesterday, this week, I've had discussions with Leicestershire and Nottingham. In Nottingham, there's a really good farm start movement getting underway. In Leicester, they're looking at setting up a new community growing enterprise on an ex-council nursery site. And Leicestershire are looking at working with an agricultural college on promoting agroecology. So we're beginning to get traction with existing projects that we're going to try and network together. As I mentioned, we've had partnerships with work in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. We'll carry on doing that. The next Policy Influencers Network group is on Tuesday next. Please do come along to that. It's free. If you're interested, you can find the Zoom link on our website. Deepen the work on farm starts, fringe farming, dynamic procurement, mapping, access to land typology, and with those partners. And also make room to explore and catalyse emerging trends, community land trusts to look after land access and land security for food production and nutrient-dense food. And as Maddie's mentioned, looking at the West of England Combined Authority, and possibly with Gareth and colleagues looking at a urban agriculture task force if we have the resources. And just the next slide, please. And just to reiterate, these are the Policy Influencers Network groups with dates. So this is my attempt to start coordinating dates. So 30th next week, Northern Ireland ping number 4 on 17th of January, then 2 further pings in February and April, and a wider interest group in May. And at that wider interest group, if you could just go to the next slide, we'll be trying to bring together exemplars of good practice in policy influencing, and hopefully we'll be able to focus some on Sheffield and Lancaster and hopefully Leeds, and hopefully we'll have 5 or 6 exemplars of policy, and including that New York City one, which we can then put out there as a precursor to COP27, and maybe along with Duncan's work, actually have a call to action for towns, cities and villages. And one of the messages that came out of the first ping meeting in September was it's time to be bold and to be radical and act with urgency. So that's me, Maddie. So you just want to say the final thank yous?
Yeah, thank you all very much indeed. Do you want to just stop the screen share? Yeah, it's been really great to hear from everybody, and thank you NRFC for an amazing conference and for supporting us all to share what we're doing and build community, keep building community together. Alice, have you read Alison's put an interesting quote in the chat as well, and it is about the crisis of imagination and reconnecting with our individual and collective imaginations. So let's all do lots of dreaming as well as action. Nice to see you, Mick. See your face. Thank you all for being here and sharing this this room together. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.